So, All Might is a pretty integral character to the story of My Hero Academia, both in canon and otherwise. Having been the symbol of peace for so long, he stood for a sense of justice so insurmountable and unwavering that by simply existing, he greatly deterred the threat of crime for decades. And with how frequently that sort of thing is brought up, it's pretty easy for those words to lose meaning over time, especially when considering he no longer holds such a position in the world. However, in knowing the dark ages of a once newly superpowered society and the overall depraved state he saved it from, it's hard not to appreciate all that he has done. All Might's positioning atop hero society was more than well deserved. He was the full package. From overall strength to heroic philosophy, not a single character could come close. And this was the case even when he was injured, or even when he was just merely clinging onto the remnants of One for All. In fact, we have never seen All Might in his prime to this day beyond his media debut that Deku so fondly heralds. And with the gap between him and the overwhelming majority of characters in the series being so large, it's almost hard to imagine him at his peak at all. But that's another subject entirely, because although All Might is by far one of the most accomplished and revered characters in the story of My Hero Academia as we know it, I find him to be exceedingly underwhelming and honestly disappointing in another very important department, and that's as a teacher. Not only as a teacher of UA, the most accomplished hero academy in the nation, but especially as Deku's predecessor when it comes to One for All. Now, All Might certainly has value as a teacher regardless of his lacking power, simply because once again, he is a paragon of heroic philosophy and morality. I mean, there's a reason Stain recognized him to be the truest hero of them all. So being their foundational hero studies teacher does make sense, but he's pretty damn terrible at it. I mean, the guy had a Teaching for Dummies book on him as late as season 3, and thus far, we've yet to really see him have any direct impact on any of the kids in Class 1A, at least in terms of his actions as a teacher. And when it comes to One for All, this is no different. Despite having passed one of the most powerful quirks in existence onto him, besides the occasional history lesson, All Might has taught Deku virtually nothing as the former possessor of the power. It's to the point where I'd go as far as to label All Might to be the worst master in shonen history, at least as far as exceedingly popular ones go. The only training All Might has ever subjected Deku to was preliminary, a process required for him to become a suitable vessel of the power. And with that, the greatest piece of advice All Might has ever given to Deku, at least in terms of handling the power, was to clench his butt cheeks. And don't get me wrong, if it weren't for All Might's influence, Deku probably wouldn't possess the heroic spirit we know him to have today, but that was more or less due to All Might's proceedings as a hero, and wasn't direct tutelage at all. Now, because I've been with this series since the debut of the manga, for the longest time, I was under the impression that once Deku succeeded in no longer tearing his body apart just to fight, that All Might would be ready to properly train him. But seeing as how Deku has been competent for a very long time now, it's clear to me that this is most certainly not the case. And admittedly, it has been expressed that the power of One for All came to All Might quite naturally, but I don't buy it, because even after the death of his own master, Shimura, he was getting his ass handed to him by Gran Torino, and even went overseas to the quote-unquote heroic capital of the world, the United States, to learn. So to say that he has always been this exceptional is nonsense. And even if he was, regardless of being a natural or not, having been in the business for tens of years, you certainly learn a thing or two in the process. And although he's definitely not an ideal parent or beacon of proper tutelage, Endeavor certainly has plenty in mind when it comes to what he desires to teach to his own successor, Shoto. So for the number one hero to lack that ability is kinda lame. And I suppose the latest and greatest piece of advice All Might had for Deku was to stop copying him. which then resulted in Deku making quite possibly the most ingenious revelation in the history of shonen, that instead of punching everything, he could kick everything. So now that's a thing. And man, when reflecting back on all this, I can't help but kind of agree with an earlier statement of All For One's, that as Deku's master, the best thing that All Might could have done for him was die. That by going away and becoming unreachable, he could have spurred on the exponential growth of his successor, just as All For One had with Shigaraki by being incarcerated. And in fact, this was something Shimura did for All Might, and he of course went on to be the greatest hero in the country's history. And although the death of a master thing may be a shonen cliche in of itself, it's one that I find works and leads to a level of maturity you may lack otherwise. I mean, past his fight with All For One, just about every piece of worthwhile information All Might has passed on to Deku at this point, including all the One For All stuff, could have been relayed to him by means of characters such as Gran Torino. But I suppose it's not too late for all that, with the prophesized death of All Might remaining on the table. But even still, I would have loved for him to have been a proper master to Deku and do anything for him beyond having him consume a hair of his. So although I think All Might is pretty great, he kinda doesn't really serve a purpose as a teacher at all, and with him now being retired, that's kind of all he has going for him. So there's a reason Deku no longer looks back to him for guidance and such, and that's because All Might is kind of irrelevant. But yeah, that's the problem with All Might. Let me know if you agree or if you disagree, and hopefully we can spark a discussion in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video and are looking for more of some of the best My Hero Academia content on the platform, Plot Armor has you covered. I am of course Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.